So this man fires his therapist after she asks for a $20 tip. And they're kind of wondering if they're the butthole. So let's get into it. Which, by the way, how crazy is tip culture nowadays that a therapist asks for tips? This therapist is supposed to be giving tips, not asking for them. An enraged man has taken to Reddit to reveal he fired his longtime shrink after she asked for a cash gratuity. The anonymous man shared the story on the subreddit thread Am I the A? Saying the female therapist only began asking for the extra money after finding out the male patient was thriving financially. My ex and I have a 12-year-old boy who's going through some things, the patient wrote. We found a therapist and we've been seeing her for a couple of years. It hasn't been life changing for me in any way. In fact, it became more of a pointless chore, like making your bed or folding your underwear. A few weeks ago, I told our therapist that it's bizarre to not have to worry about money for the first time in my life. They continued, I make good money and don't have many bills. I'm saving like $1,000 per month, which props to you. The patient subsequently stated that the therapist then began asking for a co payment following the therapy sessions. I don't have a co payment because my insurance covers 100% of therapy sessions, the Reddit user wrote. I explained that to her, the therapist, and she said that was true, but maybe I could start paying like $20 cash because she's not making a lot with what my insurance pays her, like a tip. Like, do you realize how absurd this actually is? Like, this guy has insurance that the therapist accepts that covers 100% the cost of the therapy session with no copay. Now, it would be completely different if, like, let's say that the insurance covers like 4 sessions per month, right? 100%. Well, then she could be like, oh, we could add on to like an extra session or a couple minutes, like 30 extra minutes or something like that for $20, something like that. There'd be nothing wrong with going down that like route. But this is just like straight up like scummy behavior from a therapist. And also, personally, I dislike tip culture to like such an extent, especially at places where it's just assumed that you are going to tip. Like, for example, like a Little Caesars pizza place, right? Where you walk in, basically supposed to pay like around $5, grab the pizza, and then walk out, right? Some of those are now just automatically trying to assume that you're going to pay like a 15% tip. Like, for what? Right? Like, you're literally going there, picking up a pizza, and then walking out. That's all you're doing. So the whole tip culture thing is just getting completely absurd. The patients said they were taken aback by the bold request and told the shrink that they would think about it. But after researching whether therapists should be tipped for their services, the Redditor found nothing, insisting to their ex that they were going to fire the therapist after their trust was forever broken. She, the ex, told me not to throw away 2 years of work, and I said this therapist tried taking advantage of me, the user wrote. The man subsequently had contacted the therapist, telling her that he was no longer, well, that I guess basically she was no longer needed in services. However, the shrink accused the Redditor of misunderstanding this whole tip thing. The thing is, the Reddit user definitely did not misunderstand this. The therapist was trying to make an extra buck, which there's technically nothing wrong with wanting to make more money, but as a therapist, where the whole service is 100% covered by the health insurance, you cannot do something like that. You could add extra services that they would have to pay out of pocket, but you can't do something where the insurance says, hey, this is 100% covered and you accept this insurance. Like you can't like override that. A number of Reddit users responded to the shrink saga, saying they also would have cut ties over the tip request. Me too. Wow, how unprofessional, one user declared. She should renegotiate with the insurance company if she needs more money. However, a few users encouraged the disgruntled parent to at least find a new therapist, particularly given that his 12-year-old son was also taking part in the sessions. If your son was getting something out of therapy or can, I would urge you to reach out to more therapists because there was a reason your son was going, and broken trust with one therapist doesn't mean that you and your son are now healed, one user wrote in part. And according to Psychology Today, it is not customary to tip a therapist or psychologist for their services, despite the meager earnings insurance companies tend to dole out. So let's check some of these comments. And feel free to give your thoughts. Like if you end up having to do some sort of therapy, like how would you respond to this situation? Now, I do know that there's some medical professionals that own their own practice that would be like blatantly not wanting to accept any type of insurance and be like, hey, I just do like straight up cash. I don't accept any insurance. But the services would typically tend to be cheaper in that situation just because they don't want to deal with the hassle of arguing with the insurance companies, because basically the way that like the whole insurance company payout type of system works is like you it's basically like two different people arguing over the price of something, but it also has to be billed like in a very specific way or else it doesn't get covered. Like it's such like a dumb system. So this person says, oh, hold on. This person says if the therapist has a contract with the insurance company to accept their payout as payment in full, she is in breach of the contract if she asks for more. They may drop her from their provider list if a complaint is filed. That's interesting. Now, this person says a server once followed me out of the restaurant and told me that the tip that I left was not enough. So I went back in the restaurant and took back the tip that I originally left. That should have been a good lesson for the server and the restaurant. I mean, that just sounds like a dangerous situation. Like, if you're a server and you're going to go confront someone over the size of their tip, you don't know what that person has. You don't know what that person like dealt with that day. They might just go completely ballistic. Don't try to confront someone who didn't tip enough to your liking. That's crazy. So this one says, I would avoid therapists at all altogether. I haven't met a single person that was ever helped by one. Get some friends and chew it over a pint in the pub a couple of times until you're bored with hearing your own voice, and then move on. Like the problem with the profession of therapists, if they solve your issue, they don't make any more money from you. Now, they could potentially provide very good help or services to someone, but you got to think about it, right? They're like, if we're just doing it purely by like monetary value, right? Would it make more sense for a therapist to fix the issue in the very first session? Let's say they charge $200 per session. Let's say, would it make more sense to fix that issue in that first session or string it along for maybe a year or two with one session per month, right? The lifetime value of that patient could be a very, very long time. So that's just something to like kind of like think of, right? Like every single patient that a therapist has is basically recurring revenue for that therapist. And that's kind of like a sad way to view it, but that's the reality of their business model, right? Their business model is having patients that will come see them more than once, right? That is the business model of therapists, not including whether or not they're prescribing them like, some sort of substances and whatnot, which they might get a kickback from that, depending on the substance. So it's just something to think about. Like, I've always had mixed feelings about therapists because I think if a therapist did a really good job and solved the issue or did their best to solve the issue as fast as possible to the betterment of the person, I think that'd be a lot better. But I've just seen so many instances of therapists basically charging an arm and a leg where insurance didn't even cover it or maybe only covered half of it, and they just kept on having that person come over and over and over and over again, and it never really solved what the initial problem was, right? Like, if, for example, let's say that someone goes to a therapist and let's say that they're afraid of flying planes, right? But they don't solve that issue within like 2, 3 years when that should have been able to be solved within like a couple months. Like, I see like a huge problem with that. Like, I just see a huge problem with a business model that is reliant on the customer to keep coming back because their life sucks. Like, to me, that just seems kind of like sucky, you know? So this one says a tip for what? Doing her job for which you will be billed for? The world is going insane. Okay, so this person basically put what I thought, right? I never did buy the therapy thing. It would seem that they would be in it for perpetual visits instead of trying to solve a problem. I guess if it keeps you from ending yourself, who am I to say? Right? Like, who am I to judge? But again, to me, I just don't like the business model of that. Yeah. Feel free to give your thoughts. But to me, tip culture is completely insane. Like, this is so crazy to me.